Before we begin, tell me which country you're watching this video from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay till the end, because this is the story of how an arrogant HOA built an entire neighborhood on the wrong man's land, and I made sure they paid for every brick. It started quietly, almost too quietly. The property had been in my family for over a century. 200 acres of rolling hills, oak trees, and a quiet creek that glimmered in the sunlight. For decades, it sat untouched, used only for seasonal hunting and a few family gatherings. To most people, it was just empty countryside. But to me, it was home, the one piece of land I promised my grandfather I'd protect. After years working overseas, I finally returned, ready to retire and build a modest cabin near the creek. But when I arrived, something didn't feel right. The road leading into the property, once gravel and grass, was now paved. And as I drove deeper in, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Concrete foundations, heavy machinery, survey stakes. At first, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn, but then I saw the sign, massive and smug like it owned the horizon. Welcome to Maple Ridge Estates, luxury homes starting at $750,000. They had built it right there, on my family land. The development stretched as far as the eye could see. Framed houses in various stages of construction, trucks moving dirt, crews hammering nails. It was an entire neighborhood under construction, and I hadn't sold an inch of it. The next few days were surreal. I met workers, supervisors, and even a site foreman, all of them completely confident that this land belonged to the Maple Ridge HOA. Their developer had, quote, purchased it years ago, they claimed, from a company I'd never even heard of. But the truth was clear. They had built everything on stolen land, my land. Still, I didn't storm in. I didn't yell or threaten. Instead, I decided to do something smarter. My grandfather once told me, never fight with anger, fight with paperwork. So, I drove straight to the county records office. After a few hours of dusty files, signatures, and notarized deeds, there it was. The title deed. Clean, untampered, and signed by the same family that had owned it for over 100 years. My family. Me. The HOA hadn't even done a proper title check before building. They'd been scammed by a shady development firm that sold them land they didn't own, and now they were pouring millions into property that legally belonged to me. The next few weeks were strangely satisfying. I returned often, watching their progress. Roads paved, streetlights installed, even mailboxes placed neatly in rows. Families began moving in. 96 homes in total, each one built on land they didn't own. And I let them finish. Every nail, every window, every driveway, all while keeping quiet. The HOA grew proud of their exclusive community. They threw events, handed out rule books, and even built a private clubhouse beside the creek. My creek. They had no idea the man who owned every inch of that soil was standing among them, smiling like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Neighbors gossiped about me whenever I visited the outskirts of my own property. Some thought I was a surveyor, others a landscaper. The president of the HOA, a tall, confident woman named Karen, even scolded me once for, quote, trespassing. She told me to leave HOA property immediately. That was the moment I knew exactly how this would end. Because while they saw a stranger walking the land, I saw 96 future lawsuits. I saw opportunity. I saw poetic justice waiting to unfold. But to make it work, I had to be patient. I needed every structure completed, every homeowner moved in, every dollar spent before I made my move. So I documented everything. Every delivery truck, every construction permit, even HOA newsletter that claimed ownership of Maple Ridge Estates. I even paid for aerial photography, capturing the full scope of their mistake. By the time the last house was sold, I had everything I needed. The homeowners didn't know it yet, but they were living on land that belonged to me, and the HOA's arrogance was about to cost them everything. The final push came when the HOA announced a, quote, grand opening celebration. I attended quietly, unnoticed in the crowd. Karen, dressed in her usual pastel blazer, gave a long speech about community pride and property values. The crowd clapped. The champagne flowed. And I smiled, knowing this would be the last time any of them would celebrate on stolen ground. Because the very next week, I walked into the courthouse carrying a leather briefcase. Inside it, every document proving ownership. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I told him what had happened. Within hours, word spread through the building like wildfire. The Maple Ridge HOA had built an entire subdivision on private property without authorization. 96 homes, a clubhouse, roads, utilities, everything. When I left the courthouse that day, I knew the next chapter was about to get interesting. Because while they thought they ran a neighborhood, I held the deed to their entire world.
When the legal notices went out, the entire neighborhood shook. Not from construction noise this time, but from panic. Letters landed in every mailbox of Maple Ridge Estates, each bearing my name and a cold line of legal text. Notice of ownership dispute. Unauthorized construction on private property. The reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Homeowners called emergency meetings. The HOA president, Karen, rushed to contact lawyers. The local news got wind of it. Suddenly, their picture-perfect community wasn't so perfect anymore. For weeks, they scrambled to prove I was lying. Karen went on camera claiming it was a clerical error. She even held up what she called their purchase records. But those documents were smoke and mirrors, built on fake signatures and bad data. The developer who'd sold them the land had already disappeared. Their entire foundation, literally and legally, was crumbling. I stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no arguments. Just paperwork. When the first court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom calm and prepared. Karen sat at the defense table with her attorneys, 3 of them, all sharp suits and confident smirks. They assumed this was a simple case of bitter landowner looking for a payout. They were wrong. The judge, a no-nonsense man who'd seen his share of property disputes, started by asking for proof of ownership. Karen's team jumped up first, presenting glossy folders, contracts, and survey maps. They spoke about permits, city approvals, and development rights. It all sounded impressive until my turn came. I stood, opened my briefcase, and laid out the original deed. It was dated from the 1920s, renewed, notarized, and verified through every proper channel. I presented property tax records paid under my name for decades. I had photos, aerial images, even letters from the county clerk confirming my ownership. And then came the kicker. The deed included all 200 acres, including the very lots where Maple Ridge's homes now stood. You could feel the air leave the room. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice breaking as she argued that their permits gave them legal standing. But the judge stopped her. Permits don't override ownership. Construction doesn't erase a title deed. By the time I finished, even the HOA's lawyers looked pale. They'd realized the scale of their mistake. 96 families, 96 homes, built on private land without a single legal right to it. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Then he looked over his glasses and said the words I'd waited months to hear. The land in question is, beyond any doubt, the property of the plaintiff. The HOA side erupted, not in celebration, but disbelief. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to argue for an appeal. The judge didn't budge. Instead, he ordered an immediate injunction on all property transactions, forbidding any sale or transfer of the homes until ownership was resolved. That ruling was like a nuclear bomb for the HOA. Buyers backed out, banks froze their loans. The homeowners, who had once bragged about living in exclusive Maple Ridge, suddenly realized their property titles were worthless. The houses still stood, but the ground beneath them no longer legally belonged to them. And all the while, I watched quietly. I hadn't asked for money. I hadn't demanded eviction. Not yet. I wanted them to feel what arrogance costs. The HOA had spent months enforcing petty rules, bullying residents, and even threatening me on my own land. Now, they were trapped by their own negligence. Karen tried one last move, a desperate press conference outside the courthouse. She accused me of exploiting a technicality, claiming I was ruining innocent families' lives. Cameras flashed as she painted herself as a victim. But truth has a way of cutting through lies. When the local news aired the story that night, they also aired the county's public statement confirming that all 200 acres were indeed under my deed. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Karen wasn't a victim. She was the president of an HOA that had illegally occupied someone else's property. The next morning, I got a call from the city council. They wanted to negotiate. Apparently, the entire neighborhood's infrastructure, roads, power, water, had been approved under false pretenses. If I wanted to, I could technically shut it all down. That's when I realized just how much power I held. I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I controlled the fate of an entire community. So I decided to play my hand carefully. I met with a few key officials explaining that I didn't want to displace families. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. But when the HOA offered a laughable settlement, barely enough to cover legal fees, I knew what I had to do. I rejected their offer. Instead, I prepared for a full civil claim. I demanded fair compensation for every inch of land, every home, every year of unpaid use. And if they couldn't pay up, then the land and everything on it would revert fully to me. The homeowners panicked again. Some begged the HOA to pay up. Others threatened to sue them for negligence. Karen's confidence cracked entirely. Her once proud community turned on her, calling for her resignation. But the final blow came a week later when the judge scheduled a full ownership hearing, this time to decide what would happen to the land and the 96 homes standing on it. The HOA was running out of time, their lawyers were burning through money, and Karen, who once stood so tall, now looked like someone who knew the trap had closed. Because I hadn't just exposed their mistake, I'd let them build their empire first, so when it fell, it would echo. And soon, that echo would reach everyone who ever thought they could take what wasn't theirs. By the time the final hearing arrived, the entire county was watching. News vans lined the courthouse steps, drones hovered above the Maple Ridge Estate's entrance, and reporters were camping outside Karen's home. What had started as an HOA dispute had exploded into a national story about corruption, negligence, and one man's quiet revenge. I arrived early that morning, walking through the courthouse doors with a calm that surprised even me. For months, I'd endured insults, threats, and sleepless nights. But now, as the truth stood tall behind me, I felt no anger, only clarity. Karen showed up nearly an hour late. Her usual confidence was gone. She looked exhausted, her perfect posture slouched, her face pale. The HOA board trailed behind her like soldiers returning from a lost war. Their lawyers looked equally defeated. They knew what was coming.
Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The courtroom benches were full. Homeowners, journalists, even other HOA presidents from nearby communities, all desperate to see how this would end. The judge entered, gavel striking once. He was the same man who had ruled in my favor weeks before. This time, though, his tone was sharper, colder. He wasn't just there to confirm ownership, he was there to decide what to do with an entire neighborhood built on stolen ground. Karen's attorney began with a plea. He argued that the homeowners were innocent, that they bought their properties in good faith. He begged the court to protect them, to somehow separate their interests from the HOAs. But the problem was simple. None of those homes should have existed in the first place. The foundation of their ownership, the land, had never belonged to them. Then it was my turn. I stood and presented the timeline once again. From the day I purchased the land decades ago, to the fraudulent permit approvals, to the day construction began while I was overseas, every single event tied back to the same pattern: greed, shortcuts, and a total disregard for legal ownership. But this time, I added something new. A letter from the State Property Commission confirming that the permits issued to Maple Ridge Estates were obtained through falsified documentation. Not one of them had gone through proper channels. Someone, somewhere, had forged county signatures. The courtroom gasped. The judge's expression hardened. This wasn't just a civil mistake anymore. It bordered on criminal fraud. Karen broke. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to shift blame to the developer, to the real estate company, even to her own board. But the judge had heard enough. He ordered her to sit down and called a recess. Outside, cameras flashed again. I stayed quiet, as always. There was no satisfaction in humiliating her, only the steady sense that justice was finally doing what it was supposed to. When court resumed, the judge made his ruling. His voice was clear, deliberate, and final. The land, all 200 acres, was confirmed as mine. Every home built on it, every fence post, every streetlight was legally my property. But here's where the story took a turn no one expected. The judge paused and looked at me. Then he asked what I intended to do. Would I sell the land back? Demand eviction? Seize the homes? The room went silent. Dozens of families' lives hung in the balance, waiting for one man to decide their future. I thought about the months of noise, the arrogance, the late-night threats, the constant trespassing. But then I thought about the kids. The families who had no idea their homes were built on lies. So I chose something different. I announced that I would allow every homeowner to stay. Under one condition, the HOA had to dissolve entirely, and each homeowner would have to purchase the land beneath their house directly from me at fair value. No middlemen, no shady boards, no fake rules. They would own their homes honestly, once and for all. The judge nodded, calling it the most balanced act of justice he'd seen in years. But for Karen, it was the final blow. She realized she wouldn't just lose control, she'd lose everything she built her identity around. When the gavel fell for the last time, the case was over. The HOA was officially dissolved. The court ordered an investigation into the fraudulent permits and construction approvals. And Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Ridge, was led out of the courtroom by county officers for questioning. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Neighbors whispered as I walked past, some in awe, others still processing what had happened. Many came forward quietly to thank me. They'd been miserable under HOA control, fined for grass height, colors of mailboxes, even the placement of garden gnomes. Now, they were free. Over the next few months, I set up a fair buyback program. Most families stayed, grateful for the chance to rebuild their community honestly. Others sold and left, unable to face the embarrassment. The land that had once been a symbol of greed became a story of justice, the kind that rippled far beyond one neighborhood. News outlets kept calling. They wanted interviews, documentaries, book deals. I refused them all. The point was never fame, it was principle. Karen's story, though, didn't end quietly. Investigators uncovered that she had personally approved unauthorized fund transfers and even used HOA money for personal expenses. When the truth came out, she faced multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, and negligence. Her picture appeared on every screen that once showed her bragging about her perfect neighborhood. As for me, I went back to my life on the edge of the woods, where peace returned. The bridge I had built at the entrance, the one they once ignored, now had a simple wooden sign hanging above it. It read, "Private land. Respect builds bridges. Arrogance burns them." It became a local marker. People stopped to take photos, a quiet reminder of what happens when power meets patience and loses. Looking back, I didn't win because I was angry. I won because I waited. I let them build their castle on my foundation, and when the time came, I simply pulled the truth from the ground beneath them. And that was enough. So, if you're still watching, tell me, which country are you watching from? I'm curious to know. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real justice stories like this one. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's lawful.